I'm back with a lot of pads. So today we're talking about the new upcoming SteelSeries QCK Pro mousepads. Anyone who ever played first-person shooter games or has been very active in the esports scene has probably heard about the company SteelSeries and how they produce world-leading mousepads, mice, keyboards and such. But if you look at the previous releases of SteelSeries the last couple of months and years, you'll see that these pads and mice and keyboards were not really the best or really optimal for the price. I still have nightmares about that Apex Pro limited edition keyboard for 300 euros or 350, I can't even remember. Anyways, even though the last releases were quite subpar, these new upcoming QCK Pro mousepads are hella good. But they're not perfect, and I'll explain to you why they're not perfect, and there are some little flaws with these mousepads. The first mousepad we're going to talk about is the QCK Pro Control. The QCK Pro Control is, like the name says, a control pad. That means it's quite of a slow mousepad, and it's quite rough. I'm pretty sure the surface they used is a jacquard surface, so this mousepad is actually comparable to the Freefall SV Base V2 Control and the Artisan Hayate Otsu, because both of these pads are jacquard mousepads. Nonetheless, there are some differences between the Freefall and the Artisan Hayate Otsu compared to the Control, because the QCK Control actually feels the roughest and the most controlled out of all of these three mouse pads. If you're someone who gets abrasive skin very easily and you don't use a sleeve or you don't play with a sweatshirt, then this mouse pad will probably be way too rough for you. But if you like roughness in mousepads and you like this like feedback and micro corrections when you glide across a very rough surface, then this pad is actually really good. But even though they say it's a control pad and it's quite rough, I wouldn't even say it's the slowest option out of all of them. Because even though this pad feels very controlled in micro corrections, but in terms of dynamic friction, this pad is actually still quite a bit fast. Like if you do a wide flick and you do a sudden stop, it's like still quite fast. So if you want a rough controlled jacquard mouse pad, which is very like with a very hard focus on micro corrections, then the QCK Control Pro is probably something for you. Talking about the stitching of these mouse pads, because all three of these mouse pads have the same stitching. The stitching is actually like immaculate. It's really good. Like it's below the surface stitching, which is really crazy to see from SteelSeries as their mouse pads never really had a stitching in the first place. And now that they do, to actually have this good of a stitching is actually really nice. Now let's talk about the size. I have the L version of this mouse pad, which is 49 by 42 centimeters. The size is always a little bit too small for me, as I'm someone who plays with a very low sensitivity, and I really want a mouse pad that is at least 50 by 50 centimeters. But the size is still negligible, and if you don't play very low sensitivities, then the size will make no issue for you. And according to the packaging, there's also going to be a 900 by 400 millimeter XL version of all of these mouse pads. Now, talking about the most unique part of these mouse pads is actually the base. The base is actually not a PU base or a Poron base like most mouse pads, most high quality mouse pads nowadays. Because it's a Japanese rubber foam base, which also the Lethal Gaming Gear non-pro mouse pads also use. Just like this LGG Neptune that I have right here. It basically uses the same base. So why is a pro mouse pad using a base which is actually the same base from a budget mouse pad from Lethal Gaming Gear? Well, I assume the reason is because this base in and of itself is actually quite good. And there are some differences between this Japanese foam rubber base and the one from LGG. This one is actually much thicker and much denser than the one from LGG. The one from LGG is very like flimsy, it's very like thin. You can really like easily press into it. It doesn't have a lot of feedback to it. And if you weight compare both of these mouse pads, like this is the LGG Neptune, it's a 50 by 50 centimeter pad, and the QCK Pro, which is smaller. But even though it's smaller, this pad is actually heavier. It feels heavier than this one, simply because the base is just thicker and more high quality. So if you had a budget LGG mouse pad with this base and you thought, man, this base, I like this base, but it could be better, this is a very much improved version of this. It doesn't slide across my table at all, like my arm when I flick. It does not like actually take the mouse pad with it. But there's one key issue I have with the base, and it's not even the fault of the base in and of itself, but it's the fault of the packaging. You see, the only issue I have with these mouse pads is that because of the packaging and how narrow it is, the mouse pads get rolled up way too hard. So the mouse pads like don't lay completely flat on your table. That is my only issue, and it could be so easily solved by just using a package which is a bit wider. Like, just look at, like compare the size between the Razer Strider and the packaging of the QCK Pro. It's much bigger, so the mousepad from the Razer Strider lays in a lot more loose, so when you lay it across your table at first, it's not rolled up very tightly and it lays completely flat, which is not the case for the QCK Pro pads. Like maybe, I only use these pads for like 3 days, they still don't lay completely flat, but maybe if I like put it on top of my other mousepads or something very heavy and they wait a few days, maybe then these mousepads would lay completely flat. If they could fix it, SteelSeries, I would love to see that by just using bigger packaging, but I understand that if you use bigger packaging, then you have to account in higher logistic prices, higher shipment prices, stuff like that, and obviously that will increase the price. But in my opinion, if you release a Pro mousepad, and I don't know the price of these mousepads, but so if these mousepads cost more than 50 euros, then I would say please get a bigger packaging, because yeah, if this is a Pro mousepad, if this is the top of the line, then they should lay completely flat. Now that we've gotten the overall specifications out of the way, we can finally talk about the QCK Pro balanced version. The QCK Pro Balance is basically the most similar mousepad to the regular QCK SteelSeries mousepad that basically everyone should know. But even though these mousepads are quite similar, they're not the same thing. The QCK Balance feels a bit improved in general, because the surface in and of itself is a bit more rougher than the regular QCK, and it does feel like it has a lot more stopping power in wide flicks compared to the regular QCK. But in terms of micro corrections, they're still very similar. I would say the QCK Pro Balance is basically the mousepad that comes closest to a regular but very good cloth mousepad. And mousepads that feel similar are basically like the Artisan Zero, the LG Saturn, the Fnatic Focus Pro Max, and stuff like that. If you want a really good balanced cloth control mousepad, which sort of reminds you of like the good old QCK, the good old GSR, this is the one to get. And now we're gonna talk about my favorite mousepad out of all of these three, which is the QCK Speed Pro. You guys will not believe me when I say this, but this pad is the Artisan Raiden. It legitimately is the Artisan Raiden. So many companies tried to copy the surface of the Artisan Raiden, like the spandex sort of mix, and it's very unique. Like, there are all basically like no mousepads that feel like the Artisan Raiden, not that I know of, but this one is so close to the Raiden, it basically is the Raiden. And I'm not even saying that it is like the Raiden, I'm even saying that it's better than the Raiden. Yes, you heard me right, and basically half of the mousepad community is basically gonna lynch me for saying this, but yes, this thing feels better than the Raiden, in my opinion. You see, my main issue with the Raiden is that even though like fast flicks are really good because this pad is like absurdly fast, micro corrections feel so incredibly fast on the Raiden that I just cannot control it. And this is where the QCK Pro Speed actually shines, because it still has the really good like wide flick characteristics of the Artisan Raiden, but it still has this like very nice, very tight, very fluid micro corrections that just feel overall better than the Raiden, in my opinion. You get this sort of like slight tuck. Like, it feels like only like 5%, like very subjectively said, 5% slower than the Artisan Raiden, but that is exactly what I was still lacking in the Raiden in and of itself. And now I'm finally getting it from the QCK Pro Speed. I know, all of this is very subjective, and it's just my personal opinion, but if you really like using the Raiden, then you will love using this QCK Pro Speed mousepad. And the slight differences in micro corrections is something that is just overall way better for me. But yeah, if you want to try it, you should really go for it. Out of all of these three pads, the Speed is basically the most unique one because it resembles the closest to the Raiden, which is a very unique pad in and of itself. So yeah, this has been my review of the upcoming SteelSeries Pro mousepads. I've used them for 3 days, I've played a lot of ranked, and yeah, I can say these pads are basically certified. SteelSeries made good products again, like really good products. I don't know what the final price is gonna be, but if it's sort of like in between the 40 to 50 euro range, these pads are gonna be a banger for the market. So thanks again for SteelSeries for sending these mousepads out for review. And if you don't want to miss any of my new upcoming videos, I will review some mousepads, some keyboards, some new very interesting mice. If you don't want to miss these, please like and subscribe, and see you next time.